G'day, Dave here. It's December the 18th, 1 week from Christmas, and we've been looking at how God has prepared us for that very first Christmas. And I hope you don't mind, but I'd like to take a few minutes just to give you something of my story, to give you a bit of background as to who I am and where I fit into history, which is not particularly dramatic, but I'd like to share it with you nonetheless. My father's name is Norman, and my mother's name was Ruth. And my grandparents on dad's side were David and Edna, and he was an engineer. And my grandparents on my mother's side were Colin and Nancy, and he was a Methodist minister. And I was born on the 12th of August 1962 in the Jessie McPherson Hospital in Melbourne, Victoria. And when I was brought into this world, it was a Sunday, and the church bells were playing, and the following day was my uncle's 21st, and my mother reminded me many times that she missed her brother's 21st because I was born on that day. My nana told me that her father had played AFL football for Carlton, and my grandparents on the other side never talked to me at all about their parents, and that was a little bit of a mystery. Well, I was born in Melbourne, but we didn't stay there very long. We moved to King Island, which is in the middle of the Bass Strait, and we lived in the town of Curry, and we stayed there for 4 years. I don't remember a lot about Curry. I know it was very windy, and I know that there was a forest of kind of petrified wood, and I know that it was an island because you couldn't go anywhere without getting on a boat or an aeroplane. We stayed there until I was 4. My sister was born along the way. And then we moved to Tasmania to the town of Longford. Now, Longford was about 20 kilometres south of Launceston, a very small town, really. I guess it's a farming community by and large. And in that town, there was a wood mill. There was a river that went alongside the town, and that river often flooded. And some of my earliest memories involved the flooding of Longford, and one particular flood that hit the newspapers where my father was involved in rescuing some people and providing supplies using a small boat. During the time in Longford, my brother was born in 1969. But the other highlight of that year was that we got to gather together in a classroom in front of a black and white television and watch the first moon landing. There was Neil Armstrong and his crew. There was one small step for a man and one giant leap for mankind. Well, we moved on from Longford after we'd been there for 5 years, and we lived in the town of Launceston in the north of Tasmania. We lived on the heights of West Launceston, right on the edge of the gorge. And I remember accounts of people whitewater rafting down the gorge under flood, and some people from a local mission organisation drowning because they really shouldn't have been in those tremendous, tumultuous waters at that time. I don't remember a great deal about those times, except that I went to what had been a girls' school. It used to be the Methodist Ladies' College. I went there for year 7, and I was amongst the first cohort of boys. And we didn't have enough boys in the entire high school to make up an AFL team, so we had to play soccer. Well, at the end of that year, my family moved again, and this time we left the island of Tasmania and we moved to Canberra. But I can still remember the night that we got on the boat and left Tasmania with all of our belongings, because I stayed up late and I was listening to the radio, and on that same night, the Lake Illawarra boat, which was carrying tons and tons of cargo out through the Derwent River, crashed into the Tasman Bridge. And it brought down the pylons, and a large section of the bridge collapsed onto the boat and into the water. There were a significant number of people killed on the boat and people in cars. And there were 2 cars that I can still see the footage of them hovering over the edge. 2 Holdens. One was a Holden Monaro GK, I think, GQ perhaps, GTS, and an EK wagon there hovering and just teetering on the edge. Well, we got to Canberra in 1975, and 1975 was a volatile year to be in Canberra. I remember it was the 11th of the 11th in 1975, and we got the news at school. And I came home and I said to my father that the Prime Minister, Gough Whitlam, has just been sacked by the Governor-General, and the Leader of the Opposition, Malcolm Fraser, has been made the Prime Minister. And my dad looked at me and argued. He said, no, that can't happen. Well, maybe it can't, or it shouldn't have, but it did. Those events took place, and I can still remember my uncle sometime later standing on the same steps outside Old Parliament House saying, well may you say God save the Queen, because nothing will save the Governor-General. Those were the words of Gough Whitlam. Well, through those next few years, I finished my high school, Campbell High, Dixon College, and I went off to university. I moved to Sydney. I lived at the University of New South Wales. I lived in a residential college called New College. It was there that I made many friends, and I met my now wife, Fiona. We decided that we'd get married, and at the end of my degree in 1983, we were married. Well, I could keep telling you about our life. I could tell you about our move back to Canberra, the 4 children that we've had, the 4 grandchildren that we now have, where we're living now on the mid-north coast of New South Wales in Bonny Hills. I could go into detail about names and dates and places and events and circumstances. And I would be giving you a history. Well, friends, I want to read you another piece of history. Come back to Luke chapter 2 and verse 1. In those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world. This was the first census that took place while Quirinius was governor of Syria, and everyone went to their own town to register. So Joseph also went up from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to Bethlehem, the town of David, because he belonged to the house and to the line of David. He went there to register with Mary, who was pledged to be married to him and was expecting a child. And while they were there, the time came for the baby to be born. And she gave birth to her firstborn, a son. And she wrapped him in cloths, and she placed him in a manger, because there was no guest room available for them. Do you know what you just heard? You heard history. You heard the evidence for the birth of Jesus. You heard about the time and the place that it took place. You saw surrounding events that were going on at the time. The rulers in this place and that place. The town over here and the town over there. And the reason that Joseph and Mary went back to Bethlehem. And what you discover here are that God's promises. A promise that one would come as a descendant of David and be born in Bethlehem. A promise you can read in Micah chapter 5 and verse 2. A promise that's there in the book of Ruth that we've already seen. How it is anchored in history. It's anchored in time and space. Here are real events taking place before our eyes. Friends, when we're talking about Christmas, we're not talking about a myth. We're not talking about Santa Claus. This is no workshop of elves at the North Pole. This is God come amongst us in Jesus, born in real time in a real place. We're dealing with history. You can go back and you can check out all the events that are here. You can look at places and names and events and circumstances. And you can explore that these things are not just ideas. Christianity is not just an ideology, but this is history where God enters in Jesus Christ to save us. How good is that?